In this video, we're going to learn about how to draw a good free body diagram from the story of a problem. Here are the 3 tricks that I use to help students draw free body diagrams correctly the first time. There are 3 things you can do. The 1, you can label your forces, force on blank by blank, stating the 2 objects that were involved in each force. If you can't think of the object that's doing the pushing, then you might be making up a force. This is one way that we can tell whether or not we're making up a force. Okay. Bubble physics. You can draw an image, a picture of the situation, and you draw a circle or bubble around the object, and then anything that's anything that's going to push is going to penetrate the bubble, actually either touch the object, or some things penetrate from a distance like gravity, right? So there might be a gravitational field that penetrates the bubble. And the last thing is you need to think about your knowledge about whether it's moving, whether it's accelerating, and what the net force should be. So your expectations on that based on Newton's laws, right? The fact that we know that objects that aren't moving should have no net force. When they are moving, but are moving at a constant speed, they should still have no net force. And when they're accelerating, that is the one time when it should actually have a net force. And the fact that the net force and the acceleration are always in the same direction. All these things that we've talked about before, these are the things that we can use to just double check to make sure that our free body diagram makes sense according to the laws of physics that we know thus far. Now, each of these slides the video is going to pause, or if not, I want you to pause the video and sketch a free body diagram for that scenario before I go over common student mistakes and things like that. So pause the video and look and sketch this free body diagram for this situation, which is Maddie sitting on a table. All right, so these are the most common answers that students will do. A lot of students will draw a free body diagram like this, where they have one force going down. They often will call that force on Maddie by, and the most common answer is by gravity. Now, there's a problem with that because gravity is not an object, right? So the thing that exerts gravity is the planet Earth pulling downward. So the correct label would be something like force on Maddie by Earth. This is a common free body diagram, but I can use my knowledge about forces and net forces and expectations to say something's wrong here. This would be accelerating down because this has a net force, and a scroll just sitting on the table is not accelerating downwards. It's not even moving, so therefore the net force in this case should be 0. I've got to have something else pushing up on it. Well, what's pushing up on it? Bubble physics can help us with this. If you draw a picture of the situation and put a bubble around the scroll, you can say, okay, what's penetrating the bubble? Gravitational field is penetrating the bubble, pulling the scroll down, and the table is underneath the scroll, penetrating the bubble. So there must be another force acting on Maddie the squirrel to balance out the one down so that we have a net force of 0, and that force would be force on Maddie by table, because that's the only other thing that's penetrating the bubble. The next situation is that of Maddie under a book. All right, these are the 2 most common answers, at least that we can talk about, that are mistaken. You might have a different answer that is actually correct. Neither of these are correct, but we're going to talk about how we would correct them if your answer was something like this. So this first one over here has 2 forces. They are equal in size, which is great. That fits our knowledge about the force, the expected net force. It's not moving, therefore the net force should be 0, and this shows the net force is 0. This force upwards is the force on Maddie by table. This force downwards is the force on Maddie by earth and book. This is actually a pretty good free body diagram. It has all the important components. However, this force right here has 3 objects involved, and forces do not have 3 objects involved. They only ever have 2. So this really should be split into 2. There's 2 forces. There's a force on Maddie by earth and a force on Maddie by book, shown over here. So we're going to get rid of this free body diagram, and we're going to use this one over here. This is another common thing students will do. They'll have force on Maddie by table up, force on Maddie by earth, which is gravity, going down, force on Maddie by book, going down, and this is very common. And then oftentimes they'll have another one up, not always, but sometimes they'll have another one up. Sometimes it's because they make these 2 the same and they want something else to contradict. Now there is another force going up. and that is actually good that they drew that. That force going up would be the force on the book by Maddie, right? So Maddie's down here, there's a book on top, and Maddie is pushing the book upwards. This is a real force. However, this is a force on the book. All of these forces are on Maddie, on Maddie, on Maddie, but this one's on the book. If you recall, this is a free body diagram, meaning that this is free of all other objects. We focus on one object at a time, and while this is a true force, it just doesn't belong on this free body diagram. So in addition to drawing the right forces, which now we have all the correct forces on this free body diagram, we also need to make sure we draw them qualitatively the correct lengths. So right now, these two are the same length. We have another force downwards. This has more force downwards. That's a problem because I want the net force to be 0. Therefore, I've got to lengthen this force. Now, the table automatically knows how hard to push. It'll just magically push harder because now there's more force down. Because tables can't really think for themselves, they just react to the scenario and push harder as needed. If Maddie the squirrel puts a lot more books on her, there'll be more force downwards, and then there'll be the table will just naturally push up harder because it won't let Maddie fall through the table, unless, of course, the table breaks. All right, this situation is of Maddie the squirrel on a frictionless cart rolling across the floor at a constant velocity to the right. Common answers are things like this, where we'll have two forces, force on Maddie by floor, force on Maddie by earth, and these two are balanced because squirrel's not accelerating up and down. Most people are getting that by this time. Oftentimes people also put a force forward or to the right, and they'll label it something like force on Maddie by, and they'll choose different things. They could say force on Maddie by motion, force on Maddie by momentum, force on Maddie by, I don't know what else you could do, but those are most common answers. However, if we do some bubble physics and we see the floor is penetrating the bubble, we see gravity is penetrating the bubble, these two are real forces, but I don't see any object pushing the cart forward. Plus, if you try and think of this force, the name of it, force on Maddie by, and you're coming up with things like motion, motion's not an object. Motion can't push. Neither is momentum. These things are not objects and therefore are not, like, it can't be named that. So if you're thinking of something else, that's fine, but this has to be an object. If you can't think of a good object that's pushing Maddie forward, and I don't see any objects pushing Maddie forward, then the odds are you're actually making the force up. Those are two good ways to check to see if you're making it forces. You either can't think of the name of the force, or you are right, or bubble physics to see if there's anything else penetrating the bubble. All right, next and last situation that we want to look at that I'll go over, and then you'll just try two more on your own. Maddie is in a car moving forward to the right, but this time she is slowing down. So what do you think? Common answers are something like this. We might have something like force on Maddie by table, force on Maddie by earth. We might have force on Maddie by something pushing it forward, maybe the engine of the car, force on Maddie by friction, right? These could be different things that we'll do. Let's go over this. These two are new, so we'll talk about them. Force on Maddie by friction. By the way, friction is not an object, so this would not be the name of the force. Friction is the actual name of the type of force, but the object that is exerting friction on her might be something like the surface. You could say something like force on Maddie by surface. The other force here, force on Maddie by what's pushing the squirrel forward. She's in the car. We might think of something like engine. That's an object, right? But please keep in mind that engines don't push the car forward. You can't have, that's like saying my heart pushes me forward when I move. Well, your heart is what gets your blood going, allows you to do different things, but it allows you to live. The engine allows the car to live, and for the car to move its body, its wheels, spin its wheels, my heart and the electrical impulses of my body, that's what allows me to move my arms. But if I'm like in outer space flailing my arms around, I'm not going anywhere. My body doesn't move forward. I might wave my arms and legs back and forth, but I don't actually go anywhere. Same thing with a car. You put a car on an icy surface, it has an engine, you push the gas pedal, it doesn't go anywhere. You need a physical object. You can't have an object that's a part of it move itself forward. I can't push myself forward with my hand. It needs to be two separate objects. So Maddie and the car are all one object. Notice this is a free body diagram of actually the Maddie car system. So Maddie's not pushing herself forward. I want to use something like engine. I'm making this force up. There's nothing pushing it forward. That's a good thing, because if you're moving to the right and you're slowing down, you actually need a net force backwards. There is nothing moving the car forward, pushing the car forward, but there is something pushing the car back, which allows the car to slow down. This is the correct free body diagram for this scenario. All right, we've got two more situations. You're just going to draw it, and then I'm going to give you the answer and talk a little bit about it. Maddie is in space, moving forward at a constant, or moving left at a constant speed. The answer is this: no forces, right? She's moving, but there's nothing acting on her. She's in space. There's not even gravity. We might want to put a force going this way, right? But again, forces are not linked to motion. They're linked to acceleration. Constant speed, it should be a net force of 0. Nothing acting on her. Bubble physics, you draw a bubble around Maddie the squirrel hanging out in space. There's nothing touching her. She's just moving. What got her moving happened in the past. I don't know what got her moving. Something must have pushed her at some point to accelerate her forward, right? So that she would be moving forward. But in this moment, she's already moving. I don't need a force to keep her moving. Another situation. Maddie the squirrel in the air after jumping up and over. What would be all the forces acting on Maddie? Here is the answer. The answer is one force gravity acting down. We can tell this by doing, again, bubble physics. I do bubble physics around her, and I see what is touching her. Nothing. Nothing's touching her. Well, but she is near Earth, so there is a gravitational field penetrating her bubble, so there will be a force of gravity down. I can use bubble physics to figure this out. We often want to put a force this way. Many times we'll say something like force, and we'll say force by stick. But the problem is at this moment, remember, free body diagrams are moments in time. At this moment, the stick is not touching her. Okay, so there is no force this way. There was a force this way, which got her to start moving. That did get her to accelerate this way at one point. It got her to start moving, but at this moment, there is nothing pushing her in this direction. She may be moving in this direction, but she is actually being pushed down and therefore accelerating downwards, which is the direction she starts to move because of that acceleration.